That's Nick.
And that's Joseph. And today we're here to talk about episode 6 of The Lost Flowers of Alice Hart, which will be available on Amazon Prime August 25th, 2023.
I remember episode 5, I recall thinking it was maybe the less eventful or the least eventful.
Yeah, episode 5 stands out overall in the series. It's kind of one of the, like a filler episode almost. Like we're taking our time and padding it out a little bit. The title of this episode is Wheel of Fire, The Color of My Fate.
But this one had a lot going on.
This one, yes. Mm-hmm.
And it starts with something, I learned something new because there's a message in the opening to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander viewers about the programming containing images of like death. Mm-hmm. So I was reading about that and how certain communities avoid talking about the dead out of respect. Mm-hmm. So that was good to know. But so the episode opens with Dylan and Alice talking about having babies, which mm-hmm. clearly is not a good idea, seeing as how we can tell that Dylan is... They planted the seeds in the previous episode about how has the marks of an abuser.
Yeah.
And then Twig is still out here looking for Alice. So we see her hanging posters somewhere, like missing person posters, and she randomly bumps into this lady, and they spark up a conversation and have lunch, mm-hmm. which is important later on in the episode because Twig is driving and sees that this woman and her family, their car is broken down on the side of the road. So Twig offers to give them a ride, and the woman says, well, why don't you come hang with us? I'm going to go see a bunch of other ladies. And this woman's like an Aboriginal woman. Mm-hmm. So they all sit around like a campfire and talk, and there's a really emotional scene where Twig sort of finally lets go the feelings or the grief she had about losing her own children.
Mm-hmm. Her biological children. Mm-hmm.
Her biological children, which speaks to why she was so invested in Candy and Alice.
And Charlie.
Why?
And which explains why she was so upset with June for just abandoning this boy, because she had her own children that she could never get a hold of again because social services took them away because of an abusive husband, and she doesn't know where they are.
So Alice, because Alice and Dylan work together with these other young people and they get invited to go out. So we see Alice gets all dolled up, waiting for Dylan to come home. And we have to remember, Alice has her own place, but she's been shacking up with Dylan. So she puts on this like shimmery, like short, shiny dress and takes off her panties, gets all excited, grabs a cold beer, waiting for Dylan to get home. And when he does, she goes, are you ready for our date night? And you could tell he's mad. Mm-hmm. And basically tells her she looks slutty.
Yeah, and why she want to go out look like that, so all of their male co-workers can masturbate over her. He's gaslighting her.
So we know Siggy, June, doesn't want to go through treatment for her cancer, but she's also refusing pain medication. And then we get a scene where she's trying to write letters to everyone, like her death letters. And it's a sad scene because Candy stops her like, can you just stop? I need you to like look at the letters you're writing. And then we see the letters and they're all gibberish. So of course June gets upset and agrees to get the pain medication, which I think is funny because later on in the episode we see her like she's high on the pain meds.
Which I'm assuming is morphine. Yeah, she's feeling good all of a sudden.
Yeah.
Which is rare to see this character feel this way.
But June then asks Candy to write a letter to her true love. And we find out that, because in episode 2 or episode 1, we hear a story about how there was this man, Robert Barron.
They tell a story about the robber baron.
And say, so we assumed this man, and that's
who June was meeting by the river and impregnated her with. That's how we got Clem.
But that's not the real story. So Robert Barron is actually Roberta Barron, so a woman. So this is June's true love. However, she did get pregnant by the river because a group of men raped her. Mm-hmm. So Clem is the product of a sexual assault. But Roberta was with her that day at the river when this happened, but Roberta was able to get away. So after that assault, June never talked to Roberta again. So the letter she had Candy write was basically telling her she's always loved her, she was her true love, and that she never blamed her for what happened on that day. Mm-hmm. But when Candy goes to deliver the letter, she finds out Roberta has long since died.
Yep.
So, but that was
That's a pretty
shocking.
Shocking and a very emotional scene that I thought was very well done. And also, obviously, a divorce from the book because June's character, the author dispatches with almost immediately after Alice leaves the farm. So we get none of this kind of much more fruitful, enriched backstory for June that we do here, and I think it works really well.
Twig does end up going to Alice's job, like as this park ranger, and Alice sees her, so she kind of hides. So Twig never realizes she's there, because all Twig does is show up and then hang signs. She doesn't actually ask anyone, like, do you know this person? I thought that was pretty messed up, that Alice just let this lady, who's clearly trying to find her, just drive off.
And drive all the way there.
The way there. She keeps calling, Twig keeps calling Alice's phone.
She calls her phone because Alice does reach out. And I saw that as a way for her to try to create some control over this life that is already crumbling around her with this relationship with Dylan, because she calls Twig and angrily says, "Leave me alone, I'm happy here, I'm in love, I have a nice life." And it's like, well, actually, we know that, we can see that you're just beginning to not believe that's true.
And Dylan is showing all the signs, like he's like a textbook abuser. He's gaslighting her, ghosting her. He's acting really jealous. He does something mean to her and then says he's sorry, gives her gifts. So it's very, very clear what's going on.
The ghosting scene's really creepy because as we said, they've kind of been shacking up at his place, and then suddenly he doesn't show up. And then, and I think she shows up at his place and she's basically locked out. So she thinks maybe he's back at my place. And she goes there and it's creepy. She apparently hasn't been there in some time, but it stinks inside because there's this dead rat.
Yeah.
And there's this ambiguity about whether or not that might have something to do with him. It feels like that she's just instantly uneasy, won't pick up his phone, and then has to wait to speak to him the next day at work. And he's like, "Oh, I took pain meds and passed out." And you can see, as an outsider, you can see the games he's playing, but you see it in her expression, like she doesn't know how to react. And when somebody does that to you, I don't know if anybody's ever had anybody do things like that to them, but it's like, I don't know. It's hard, especially if you're not communicating with other people about what's happening, it's really hard to get out of that.
Well, then he also assaults her because the next day he tells her, "Oh, let's just you and I go out for a walk." And then at the last minute, he cancels on her. So she goes on a walk on her own. And when she gets back to the house, he's there. And he's screaming at her, like, "Where were you?" And he, like, strangles her. Mm-hmm. I was going to say about Siggy dancing on pain meds. It was like she was vibing out, like at Lilith Fair. I thought that was pretty funny.
I thought it looked cute. But yeah.
Probably the thing I dislike the most about the series, or that doesn't really resonate with me, is this whole flower narrative and how the flowers can tell a story. Because it just feels so like tacked on. It doesn't really feel integral to what's happening at all, except that these women at Thornfield have something to do tending to the flowers. Mm-hmm. So that makes sense. But we never really learn like how they learned. I feel like for a story that every episode we get like an arrangement and what the arrangement is saying. We never really learn like how they came up with this language, and I don't know, it feels kind of weak to me. But I'm bringing that up because at one point Sigourney is creating like an arrangement that's basically like her death arrangement, like I'll always be with you all, and Candy tells her finally, like, "Stop, use your words, not these bloody flowers." And I thought that was good. But then I was also a little confused with Candy because she seems very upset about Sigourney, like, and her death or like dying, because we know that she's not accepting treatment. her accepting pain meds is not going to accelerate her death.
No, but she thinks that's the beginning of the end.
But the way she's reacting to me just kind of felt like people grieve in their own way, so it's nothing like that. It just is interesting to me how some people process grief and the possibility of death, and the way Candy's doing it is definitely like the opposite of my style, so I found her a little frustrating.
No, but you have to understand that she'd kind of been left out in the cold, it seems like, by June for many years, and this only very recently has she come to feel close to her. So I think that would add to wanting more time.
Yes, that makes sense to me. We get a scene where, you know how like people will burn fields for like it's like the agricultural burning, like planned burning of like fields and trees. So the park rangers are doing that. And we get a moment where Alice has to be a part of it. So she's in her like fire protection suit out in these fields. And of course she has a panic attack because she has a flashback to when her parents died in the fire. And I thought of another really creepy scene with Dylan is after it's all said and done, one of the other male rangers is comforting her and gives her a hug, and he sees it, gets upset. Then later that night they get into a really big fight. And he says to her like, basically like, I should have known you'd be like this, like you killed your parents in a fire. Like, oh my God.
It's pretty, I mean, it's anytime somebody's being abused, it's hard to watch, but
But they get into a really big fight, and he like hits her, strangles her, and I mean, the best part of this episode is when she finally gets mad enough to grab something, and she grabs a lamp and hits him upside the head.
And I think that it ends in a good moment where she is able to escape, goes and locks herself back in her place, and he shows up and is trying to
get in, but she won't let him in. And that's the end of the episode.
And it's kind of like a Greek tragedy of, fate. Like, we have these parents or these guardians doing everything they can to protect their children from going through this thing, and that's exactly what their kid walks into.
Well, and not even, I mean, even beyond that, like Alice grew up, like she's so, not just witnessing it, because, we all say like, because people continue patterns, but this young lady also lived in a space where she saw that there is a way out, and she still is kind of like blind to what's happening. But I'm looking forward to how the series ends. Do you have anything else?
No.
Hit the thanks button. Listen to our podcast. Bye.